What atheism actually claims. Before we get into the charges, we need to be precise about what atheism is actually claiming, because atheists love to define their position as modestly as possible. They say atheism is simply the absence of belief in God. Nothing more, nothing less. But the moment an atheist argues that religion is harmful, that science explains the universe, that reason should guide human decisions, or that morality is real and religion violates it, they are no longer simply without belief. They are making bold, positive claims about the nature of reality. The full atheist position, when laid out honestly, goes something like this. There is no God. The universe is entirely material. Human beings are the accidental product of undirected natural processes, and everything we call meaning, love, morality, consciousness is ultimately just chemistry and electrical signals in a skull. That is not a humble position. That is one of the most sweeping claims a person can make about the entire nature of existence. And what makes it stranger is that atheism's loudest voices have spent decades presenting this radical claim as though it were simply the default, obvious, scientifically neutral conclusion, something you arrive at automatically once you shed your childhood conditioning. But a claim that attempts to explain all of reality, all of human experience, all of morality, and the origin of the universe itself is not a default position. It is a worldview, and it deserves to be examined with the same rigorous standard atheist demand of religion. 3 charges follow. The logic problem. The first charge against atheism is that its entire foundation is self-defeating. Atheists stake their position on reason and evidence. They say you should only believe what logic and science can actually support. That sounds reasonable on the surface, but here is the problem they cannot escape. If human beings are entirely the product of undirected evolution, shaped by nothing but random mutation and survival pressure, then the human brain was not designed to find truth. It was designed to survive. Oxford philosopher Alvin Plantinga formalized this argument and called it the evolutionary argument against naturalism. And the logic is difficult to dismiss. If your cognitive faculties are the product of a process that selects for survival rather than truth, you have no solid reason to trust that those same faculties are reliably producing accurate beliefs about anything, including the belief that evolution is true and God does not exist. A brain wired to survive on the African savanna 2 million years ago is not automatically a brain calibrated for correctly evaluating abstract metaphysical questions today. Charles Darwin himself saw this problem coming. In a letter written in 1881, he admitted that when he tried to trust his own convictions, he always felt what he called the horrid doubt that the convictions of a man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. The man who handed atheists their most important scientific tool looked at that tool and admitted he couldn't fully trust it. Since the atheist is left in an impossible position, they use reason to argue that reason evolved from unreason and then ask you to trust the conclusion. This is not a minor philosophical footnote. It is a crack running straight through the foundation. The worldview that claims to be built entirely on logic quietly saws off the branch it's sitting on and then acts surprised when the whole structure feels unstable. The moral problem. The second charge is the most serious one because it is not theoretical. It is written in the historical record of the 20th century. Atheism cannot ground objective morality, and when societies have officially built themselves on that foundation, the results have been catastrophic. This charge is not about whether individual atheists are good people. Many are decent, generous, and principled. The charge is about what happens at the level of civilization when a society officially adopts the position that there is no God, no transcendent moral law, and no human being made in any sacred image. The 20th century ran this experiment at full scale. Not once, but 3 times. The Soviet Union under Stalin, China under Mao Zedong, and Cambodia under Pol Pot were all explicitly atheist regimes that rejected religious morality as superstition and replaced it with the authority of the state. Together, those 3 regimes killed over 100 million of their own citizens within a single century. The historian J. Rummel, who spent decades cataloging what he called democide, the murder of people by their own governments, concluded concluded that atheist states in the 20th century were responsible for more civilian deaths than all the wars of that century combined. Atheists will respond by pointing to the Crusades and the Inquisition, and those events deserve honest examination. But careful historical scholarship places the death toll of the Crusades across 2 centuries at somewhere between 1 and 3 million, and the Spanish Inquisition executed fewer than 5,000 people over 350 years. Stalin's regime killed that many people in a single week during the height of the purges. The scale is not comparable. The charge is not that religious people are incapable of violence. The charge is that when God is removed as the transcendent source of human value and dignity, human beings become objects that the state can categorize, relocate, and dispose of. And the historical record shows with brutal consistency what tends to follow. Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher who declared God is dead, understood the consequences better than most atheists today. He did not celebrate. He warned that the death of God meant the collapse of every value system built on that foundation, and predicted that the 20th century would experience wars unlike anything the world had seen before. He wrote those words in the 1880s. He was right on both counts. The faith problem. The third charge is the one atheists find most irritating, which is usually a sign it has landed accurately. Atheism requires more faith than Christianity, not less, significantly more. Consider carefully what the atheist position actually requires you to accept. It requires belief that the entire universe came into existence from nothing, with no prior cause, for no reason, and from no material. It requires belief that the physical constants governing matter, gravity, electromagnetism, and nuclear forces are calibrated with such extraordinary precision that any variation beyond fractions of a decimal point would make chemistry, stars, planets, and life entirely impossible, and that this precision occurred by accident with no designer. The physicist Roger Penrose calculated that the odds of the initial conditions of the universe occurring by chance are so remote that expressing the number would require more zeros than there are particles in the observable universe. Atheism requires belief that from non-living chemicals, self-replicating life somehow assembled itself into existence, a process that has never once been observed or replicated in any laboratory under any condition. It requires belief that from that first accidental life, undirected mutations driven by nothing but environmental pressure produced every organ system, every immune response, every eye capable of processing color and depth, and every human brain capable of writing symphonies and doing calculus, without any guiding intelligence directing the process at any point. And finally, it requires belief that from that entirely blind biological process emerged consciousness, the subjective inner experience of being aware, which neuroscience still cannot explain, and which philosophers of mind have labeled the hardest problem in all of science. Christians are regularly told that believing in a creator requires a leap of faith. That is fair. But the question is never whether you are taking a leap of faith. The question is which leap the available evidence better supports. Atheism asks you to accept that nothing produced everything, that randomness produced irreducible order, that non-life produced life, and that unconscious matter produced the very consciousness you are using right now to evaluate these claims. That is not a smaller leap than theism. It is a larger one, taken in complete darkness, with no net underneath and no explanation waiting on the other side. The verdict 3 charges have been presented. Atheism is logically self-defeating because it uses reason to undermine the very reliability of reason itself. Atheism cannot ground objective morality, and the 20th century produced the most thorough and devastating historical test of what follows when states actually act on that conclusion. And atheism demands a degree of faith in a chain of unobserved, uncaused, and statistically staggering events that exceeds anything Christianity asks its followers to accept. So the jury faces 3 possible verdicts, and only 3. Either atheism's leading voices are intelligent people who have genuinely examined these objections and found compelling answers they simply do not publicize, which raises the question of why they don't. Or atheism's advocates are so committed to their conclusion that they are willing to ignore the deepest problems with their own foundation, holding their position not by reason but by preference and social pressure. Or the Atheist Project, the attempt to build a coherent and livable account of reality morality, and meaning without God is genuinely broken at its core, and what the world mistakes for intellectual confidence is actually a refusal to look too closely at the cracks. The case has been made. The next time someone tells you that abandoning God is the rational move, it is worth asking which of these three charges they have actually answered, because walking away from a question is not the same as resolving it, and sounding certain is not the same as being right. Subscribe for more.